Hello everybody and welcome back to Spacedock. I'm Hojiwana and today we're doing a comparison between the two big weapon archetypes seen throughout sci-fi, kinetic and energy. What's the difference? Well, a kinetic weapon feels pretty simple. It's something that hits a target with a projectile. So either a gun or a direct impact missile of some variety, from a little KKV up to a redirected asteroid. That was easy. Surely defining an energy weapon will be simple and easy too, right? Oh god. The problem is that energy weapon is a bit of a nebulous term, so are energy weapons dependent on the energy transferred to the target, or that used by the weapon? Well, it's definitely not the latter. Kinetic energy from a projectile in a gun comes from the chemical energy stored in the propellant, but there's also the option of accelerating the projectile electromagnetically, but both of these are clearly still kinetic weapons. For good measure, let's look at the opposite, a laser, which I think we can all agree is an energy weapon. But there's lots of ways of generating them. Some use electrical power, but others run on chemical reactions to generate the laser. They're just like kinetics, capable of running off different types of input energy. So that means surely an energy weapon is defined by what it outputs, like the beam of coherent photons from a laser. But then you have particle beams, which feel like an energy weapon, but they're actually just accelerated atomic or subatomic particles, like a really tiny kinetic weapon. Going even further into the sci-fi realm, we have plasma weapons, which again feel like energy weapons, but they fire plasma, which is actual physical stuff. Okay, so it's not that. Is an energy weapon defined by how it deals damage? Laser weapons heat a target to ablate it or bore through it, something that particle beams are also capable of doing. What about plasma? These depend on the setting, but I'd say typically they have a mix of kinetic and thermal damage from the high temperature plasma impacts. So this is definitely a more promising definition. Now what about nukes? Like with plasma, they can have multiple effects on a target. There's a big shockwave if detonated in an atmosphere, but the majority of a detonation's damaging effects are thermal and electromagnetic. Does this mean nukes are an energy weapon? It doesn't feel like they are, but then there's nuclear pumped lasers which turn a nuke's X-rays into a laser beam and oh god, I don't know anymore! Words don't have meaning! Okay, alright. Effect on target does seem to have some impact on whether something is an energy weapon or not, but really the best thing is vibes. Energy weapons have been around for years in sci-fi, so there's a whole built-up set of cultural expectations that determine what feels like an energy weapon even if it technically isn't one. Lasers and particle beams? Yes. Chemical and electromagnetic accelerators? No. Plasma? Both and neither. Nukes? A special category by themselves. Now that that ordeal is over with, back to the point from the intro, comparing kinetic and energy weapons. Which is best for what? Well, I'll preface this by saying it depends on the setting and the vibes and all that, but there are some things we can say with high confidence. Like beam-based energy weapons are generally going to always be much higher velocity than any of their kinetic counterparts. Lasers obviously travel at light speed, and particle beams fire things so tiny it's easy to push them up to good fractions of light speed. That higher velocity gives them a greater effective range in space combat because they can hit something without that something being able to move out of the way. Even a low-power laser can slowly toast a target from completely out of kinetic weapon range, or shoot down missiles long before they pose a threat, making them great point defense weapons. Throw in electronic warfare options and the potential for stealth tech to be used, and the range benefit becomes a lot harder to take advantage of. If you can't target something at distance, you can't shoot it at distance. On the ground, things are a lot more complicated because, well, there's probably stuff in the way. Kinetic weapons and wacky plasma stuff can do indirect fire over objects, either like a mortar or from really far away with a higher velocity weapon. That latter thing is the whole reason the US Navy started looking into railguns in the first place, getting long range out of something that was hopefully cheaper than missiles. Indirect fire is obviously impossible for a beam weapon, so all the range advantages they have are nullified if there's a mountain in the way. Unless it's a ludicrously powerful beam, but then all bets are off. Luckily, there aren't mountains in the sky most of the time, so laser weapons have a great potential niche when being used by and against aircraft. Not having to lead the target makes engaging flying objects like aircraft, missiles, artillery shells and drones an awful lot easier. Again, we see that energy beams are potentially ideal for point defense, assuming they can effectively disable or destroy what they're shooting at in time, which is complicated a bit by atmospheres absorbing and scattering beams, reducing their power, but that can be designed around to some extent. Something else to consider for both weapon archetypes is ammunition and vulnerability. Chemical propellants are pretty dense and are easily packaged with a projectile they're meant to accelerate, making them very easily carried by infantry. On a vehicle, you can store a decent amount of them, but then ammo racks and magazines are also vulnerable to being hit and being catastrophically detonated. Something that runs on electrical power doesn't have that issue, but could still require ammo, as is the case with railguns and coil guns. Accelerators that use extremely small ammo like particle beams and macron guns can maybe get away with having functionally infinite ammo like a purely electrical laser does. All these things do need to be powered by something though, which may be too big for infantry to carry, or may need radiators to reject waste heat if used in space, which can be vulnerable to attack. Let's look at some more fun reasons to pick one archetype over the other, and I think energy weapons let you be a bit more imaginative with how they work. It's easier to make them feel exotic and high-tech, like plasma weapons for example. They aren't really a thing, but are all over sci-fi because you can just make up whatever in fiction. Same with the fun options that Command & Conquer Red Alert 2 had. The prism towers were like lasers that could daisy-chain their beams through each other, and the weaponized Tesla coils could be charged up for extra damage by Tesla troops. It also feels easier to make an advanced version of existing energy weapon tech. Sure, you can make improved kinetics with crazy capabilities like projectile size and speed, but with an energy weapon there's just more options. You can do things like the cool phaser strips in Star Trek that build along their length and can aim in any direction. This is similar to the real-life tech of phased arrays, which is used right now by radars, but is potentially applicable in the future to lasers as well. With kinetics, it feels a bit hard to do something in that vein, though they have the benefit of using exotic ammunition instead, like the plasma weapons in Nebula's Fleet Command, which are armor-burning plasma shells fired from normal guns. One of my favourite weird types of kinetic weapons are those that use a phase change in their ammo, like the Thanix cannon in Mass Effect, which fires a molten alloy of dense materials that cools and solidifies as the weapon fires. The opposite of this is the Mercury bow from Oni, which yeets out slivers of frozen mercury. God, I hope Mandalore reviews this game one day. Anyway, another point is that neither side of the weapon dichotomy is inherently more or less realistic, because you can still make very unrealistic weapons using both techs, or by ignoring one over the other even when they'd be relevant. The Expanse is a great example of this on both ends of the scale. It doesn't have laser weapons despite their superior range and ability to easily run them off the fusion reactors every ship seems to have. It also makes its railguns more exotic through its extended plasma armature things that just wouldn't work. Despite this, there's some more of those pesky audience expectations to think about. Energy weapons just feel more high-tech than kinetics do, because we already have kinetic weapons. Well, except for proper electromagnetics, which I find funny because there are laser weapons in service right now, though admittedly they are low power and very few in number. Just an interesting thing to note about the progress of technology compared to the progress of perception of technology. This particular audience expectation also means that adding energy weapons can change the way a setting feels. Adding lasers or whatever to the excellent Battlestar Galactica reboot would have fundamentally changed the way that whole show felt. Having both the Cylons and Colonials using kinetics and missiles helped to ground it all and keep it feeling serious. In the end, what do you pick between energy weapons and kinetic weapons? Well, it's all about trade-offs. Range, ammunition, power generation, cooling, intent of the weapon, and what's using it. You can probably work out what's best at any given niche in any given setting, but then toss in audience expectations with a healthy batch of vibes and you get an almighty mess. So really, you can kinda do what you want. It's more important that whatever gets used for whatever role fits into the setting as a whole, and that the creator is satisfied with their creation. You can support Spacedock by joining our Patreon, where you can get our frigate and space fighter design reference books. Alternatively, you can support us directly through YouTube by becoming a channel member. Thanks to our supporters, and thank you for watching.